and talk to Connolly.
Market capum goal genome dagum agus garmarket agus sin tokan rud go bhfuil fiche nómad agam don bhile seo bile atá dúirt an rialtas tá sé ráte an rialtas gur rud technicúil agus in anún sin tá fiche nómad an níos slúise aniu bhí gáómad agam maidir le áhar Harbheith táhachtach agus ní rud technicúil sin ní cuachtaí an ombudsman ach glachum leis an am go funwer. Minister, it's ironic that we have 20 minutes in our group in relation to a bill that's described as technical, and we had 5 minutes in relation to the Ombudsman earlier on, which I really would like to have expanded on and would have given my left arm for 10 minutes on the Ombudsman's report. And again tomorrow on mental illness. So that's just, it's not you, but it's just interesting to put it in context. We have a full 20 minutes on a bill that you have described as technical. And thank you for your speech, your written speech, and thank you for the background to it. I would also like to thank, as usual, the Library and Research Service. And on this occasion as well, I'd like to mar bhuichas don ranóg an astrucán agus glúis na milí a thug sí dúine onas go maiimiid an cúpla focail rá trí ghaeilge agus seo rud nua agus bhhalam achantas ó thuirt don astrucán seo agus éilú gníomhach táid i country an seo agus ceanna éagsúla. And what can we do? Welcome a bill? Absolutely. You know, welcome a bill that's dealing with corruption and fraud and creating new offences. But as my colleague has said, this should have been done a long time ago. In fact, today is D-Day, isn't it? Today was the day you were to reply back, the 3rd of February. So again, it's doubly ironic that we're here on that day. This should have been done before last July. And it does make for difficult reading to say a do-nothing scenario or do something. And the do-nothing scenario means we get bad reputation and we also have to pay lots of fines. And it begs the question, in the middle of a pandemic, how did we end up having so much time to discuss a bill that's technical that should have gone through the Dáil more than a year and a half, nearly a year ago? How could that happen when this time should be used for the pandemic emergency? And there's so many topics that we'd all like to speak on to keep you on your toes so that we make life easier for everybody. And here we are discussing a technical bill. And I acknowledge the work that went into it, but belatedly and too late. And so we've an expanded definition of fraud and we've a new offence of misappropriation. And there's provision for the liability arising from the offences of a corporate body that's to be welcome. Although I'm not sure how extensive that is or is it something that will have to be monitored carefully. And it also defines the scope of the European Public Prosecutor's Office. And again, I know we're not part of that, but again, if you could, I don't know whether you're going to get a chance again to speak on this, but if you could clarify what will be the nature of our cooperation with that, because we didn't opt into that section, rightly so, because we have a completely different legal system, and also because it provides for an extension of the European law into criminal law, which is new, and it's a creeping jurisdiction, isn't it? So we have to be very careful. And then it also allows for a European public prosecutor as well. And how are we going to cooperate with that? What is the nature of our cooperation? And also, who will monitor the supranational? Because they will be able to take action now in each country. Now, maybe it's good or bad, I don't know really, but certainly I would have concerns in relation to the nature of our cooperation on something like that. And of course, the extent of the fraud and corruption is anybody's guess. The library tells us there are two estimates from Europe itself, from 404 million to the House of Lords 5 billion. And we were very grateful to the House of Lords lately in relation to their attitude to Brexit and certain aspects there. And I think we should be grateful to them too again, and that they're telling us at the very least their estimate is 5 billion, and really that's only the tip of the iceberg. So that's interesting in itself. And so that brings me to the question, before I'm going to go on to the report of the review group by the Department of Justice on corruption in Ireland. You know, because it'd be nice to know when we're going to have a discussion on that. But perhaps, Minister, you could come back just on clarifications why this wasn't done in time. Are we facing any fines, number two? And what is the extent of our cooperation in relation to this office that transcends, crosses borders? And then My colleague isn't here, so I think I don't need to be so quick with this. So, Department of Justice, review of structures and strategies to prevent, investigate and penalise economic crime and corruption. We're talking about Ireland here, Minister. And actually it's a very interesting article, a report. And there's about 122 pages if you leave out the appendices. And the foreword is very interesting, because the foreword is given by James Hamilton, I think the former DPP, and that's the 9th of November 2020. And the review group was established as part of a package of measures to enhance Ireland's ability to combat economic crime, and they use that word economic crime to have a broader view of crime and corruption, which would include, as always, social welfare. But somehow social welfare to me is way down in terms of crime, but that economic crime includes social welfare. And it tells you how the report identifies a number of strengths and weaknesses in the existing structures for dealing with economic crime and corruption in Ireland. So we're putting legislation through to deal with corruption in relation to the use or misuse of funds in relation to VAT returns for Europe, while all the time we're ignoring a review here that you have since November, and I appreciate that there's a pandemic. Nevertheless, they outline many, many weaknesses going back years in relation to gaps and what should be done in Ireland. And so they tell us on the positive side, so let me be positive for a few minutes, that the principal agencies charged with the investigation and prosecution of crime function well. They function well, given the limitations imposed by their resources, which in some cases, in particular the case of the Garda National Economic Crime Bureau, are inadequate to meet existing demands, as well as increasing demands which will arise in the future. We want a more structured and coordinated approach. They go on to say that the continuing failure to legislate the area of pre-trial criminal procedures, as recommended by the Connolly report, guess when? 2003. So this report then sets out the recommendations, including legislative, structural and resourcing measures needed to enhance agency and multi-agency prevention and enforcement capabilities in the sphere of economic crime. Now, just to put it in context, Minister, and you're far more aware of this than me, but when I have the time, I'm going to use it. To put it in context, Ireland, a relatively small country with a population approaching 5 million, it is nevertheless, the fifth largest provider of wholesale financial services in the EU, with more than 400 international financial institutions located here. According to Eurostat figures, Ireland has the fifth largest proportion of workers in the financial services and insurance activities at approximately 95,000 and so on. And what is the point? The vulnerability of the financial services sector to economic crime and corruption cannot be overemphasised. Okay, this is the foreword to this before they go into the gaps and outlining the recommendations. The report, and they go on to say it was complete when the pandemic had struck Ireland, and they go on to talk about the increase in online activities. And it needs hardly to be emphasised that all of this increases the opportunities for cyber criminals and the risk of computer crime and so on. So the executive summary sets out this was part, the promises were made to deal with white-collar crime in Ireland. And really nothing much has happened in relation to it. I'm saying that. The purpose of the review is to examine specifically anti-fraud and anti-corruption structures and procedures in the criminal law enforcement, and it goes on to make 25 recommendations. 25 recommendations, and it highlights the absolute inadequacy. Let me look at SIPO, because it has a bearing on all of our lives. The review group recommends that the independence and the capacity, remember that now, the independence and the capacity of SIPO be enhanced by ensuring that resources allocated to the Ombudsman under Vote 19 are ring-fenced. The rationale behind this recommendation is that improving resourcing to SIPO will enable it to fulfil its mandate. And it goes on to talk about the gap where TDs who are no longer TDs, as an example, can't be investigated. It goes on to talk about Irish competition law, and that should be amended to create a specific offence of bid rigging. and so on. I could, the lacuna in the Ethics Act, something as basic as that. Currently, there are no provisions for examining possible contraventions of the Ethics Acts by ex-members of the Oireachtas who are not office holders. I was still just wondering if my colleague had come in. He's not. Okay. So I don't know if you've read it, Minister, and really I don't expect you ministers to have read everything. I haven't. I'm working my way through it, no more than the Mother and Baby Home report of 3,000. It's a work in progress. But it's ironic that we're here facing, as I've said and I'm repeating, and yet we have this report. So if I'll give you my 3 minutes if you want to use it, if there isn't provision for you to come back, and tell me, has your department looked at this? What has been done in relation to these recommendations that are so urgent and they're there for such a long time? I've mentioned the legislation alone of 2003 and I've gone to SIPO, and in between there's such a wide variety of recommendations that could be implemented very quickly if we were seriously interested in tackling corruption and fraud in Ireland, in Europe, but very often we resort to the lowest hanging fruit like with social welfare. So I'll give you my time, Minister. Thank you.
Good.
Give you extra time.
Good. Anish, we don't have